Chapter 1500. Preparing to depart. Jern and Alice were side by side, cleaning their weapons and armor and talking. Alice had been unusually reserved since Anthony had been taken, and Jern knew she felt somewhat responsible. Which was silly. She'd been on the platform at the time, but the attack on the nave had knocked her just the same as it had the rest of them. She had nothing to feel bad about, but she seemed to insist on it anyway. Jern, are you all right? She asked, looking concerned. The big man shook his head and smiled at her, causing her to blush slightly. She'd been like this since Anthony had exposed their feelings so openly. He knew she was a little irritated at having their feelings discussed like that, but Jern didn't mind it. He wouldn't necessarily thank Anthony for it, but he did feel like the big ant had saved them some time. I'm okay. Sorry to worry you, he replied. Why do you ask? Because you look so distracted. It didn't seem like you were hearing a single word I said. Alice did not like it when Jern wasn't listening properly, which he felt made sense. If nobody was listening when you spoke, what was the point of speaking in the first place? Alice tended to have a lot to say, which suited Jern down to the ground, since he never felt the need to speak all that much. Between the two of them, they found a good balance, he thought. Anthony is yelling at me in my head, he explained with a smile. He's really loud. Alice's eyes went wide as she stared at him with her mouth open. Shouldn't you answer him? She said, waving her hands in the air as if she didn't know what she should do with them. Why is he yelling at you? That isn't good. Is it because of me? Is he mad we haven't helped him yet? Jern reached up and wrapped one of his arms around her shoulder, squeezing her against his side. For some reason, she always went quiet when he did that. He's telling us not to go and save him, he told her. I'm ignoring him. Alice still looked very nervous, even as she leaned into him. Is it all right to ignore him though? Isn't he, like, a god? I think he is, Jern affirmed his belief, but that doesn't mean he can't be wrong sometimes. Are gods allowed to be wrong sometimes? Aren't they just, always right? Anthony, always right, I suppose that's a good point. Jern smiled at her again. It was easy to smile when Alice was around. He just doesn't want us to get hurt, so he's trying to tell us to stay away. We don't want him to get hurt, so we're going to go and save him. That's all. It's all so simple when you say it like that, Alice sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. In Jern's opinion, it was simple. It was possible for them to keep Anthony happy and still save him. They just had to do it as safely as possible. He tried to explain that to him, but Anthony didn't want to listen. If he were being honest, it was often hard to make Anthony listen. He did a lot more talking than he did listening. Despite the danger posed to the giant ant, Jern wasn't too worried. He knew that there were many people working on the rescue, people he knew were a lot smarter than he was. No matter what, they'd come up with something that would work. As if summoned by his positive thoughts, the darkness around the two thickened until it was almost impossible to see his hand right in front of his face. For a normal person, it would be impossible to do anything in a lightless place like this, but Jern had learned to adapt to it. There were ways to know what was going on around him, even when his eyes didn't work properly. OBE. The moment the Nameless One appeared, Jern and Alice turned towards them, able to feel it as the ant stepped out of the darkness. Welcome, they both signed to the ant. Able to sense the disturbance in the air caused by their movements, the Nameless One returned the greeting. Our design is moving apace. We will have everything we need in place soon. Are you ready to depart? Yes, Jern signed. Wait, are we going somewhere, Jern? I'm going to help rescue Anthony, Jern told her. Immediately, she got a look on her face, a look that he knew all too well. I'm coming too, she told him, looking determined. Of course, Jern's first thought was that he didn't want her to go. It was going to be dangerous and he didn't want her to get hurt. That was only sensible. Alice was precious to him after all, why would he want to take her somewhere she might get hurt? But Jern understood that thought wasn't a good one. That was exactly the reason why he was ignoring Anthony ranting at him right at that moment. Okay, he said, gather your things, the Nameless One signed to them. We do not have much time. Jern gave Alice a squeeze on the shoulder and she flashed him a look before they turned to pick up their armor and weapons. Do you think the kids will be coming too? Alice asked him. I doubt we could keep them away even if we tried, he replied. Once they were ready, the two Templars stepped into the waiting darkness and disappeared, leaving nothing behind. Chapter 1501. Winning time. The pressure was crushing. All over the fortress, the systems that Solent had so thoroughly built, so painstakingly tested and reinforced, were reaching breaking point. The internal cleansing system, with its interweaved network of channels, had endured enormous strain ever since the vents had started dumping incredibly concentrated toxic mana inside the fortress. The work of the construction teams had been nothing short of heroic, braving extremely dangerous conditions to conduct emergency repairs and keep the energy flowing. In truth, they had lasted longer than Solent had expected. A testament to their skill, bravery and endurance. Yet even with such dedicated ants giving their all to the task, the system was starting to crack. Solent clacked her mandibles as she read over the report. The channel system had experienced multiple, massive failures in a short amount of time. Sections of the fortress had become flooded with toxic mana, making them inaccessible and putting even more strain on the channels that remained functional. Emergency repairs would rectify the situation in hours, but if something else were to go wrong, the system could break entirely and the fortress itself would be lost. She had pushed the system as hard as it could possibly be pushed. It was time to step back. Nearby, messengers waited for her to pass the word. The air in the headquarters was always tense, but now it felt so thick she thought she might be able to cut through it with a bite of her mandibles. Send word to the teams on the platforms. Shut off the intakes. She'd barely finished getting the words out of her pheromone gland before the rush of movement occurred. The messengers were gone, the mages were working their spells. Word would be spread in a matter of minutes, the massive intakes, bringing in thunderous amounts of corrupt energy, would be shut off. It wouldn't provide immediate relief for the overworked carvers, who were in desperate need of help, but it wouldn't be long. With the amount of energy being brought in reduced by more than half, the remaining channels shouldn't break and the danger could be averted. Solent turned to her advisors. I want to hear directly from the storage where our levels are. Get me word as soon as you can. Another burst of activity. She had done everything she possibly could to keep the energy flowing. Everything depended on the storage, the fate of the fortress, the life of the eldest, the victory that Solent craved. The entire fortress was built for the sole purpose of converting mana. Solent had determined early in the course of her planning that fighting against the Fifth, and the Krath, was impossible if you tried to play by their rules. The home field advantage was simply too strong. But if that advantage could be flipped on its head, then the possibilities began to open up. Send word to the platforms, she said. I want them on standby to prepare for withdrawal. The battalions fighting out there were another point of failure right on the verge of breaking. As the wave had worn on, the level of attrition had continued to grow. The hospitals were full, the medics weren't complaining, which spoke of just how dire the situation had become. Only the platform manned by the Legion had been anything like stable, since the Krath had avoided it assiduously. Everywhere else had been engaged in a never-ending, brutal and deadly struggle for survival. The losses were high, too high, but they had held the line against impossible odds and given the colony a chance of victory. Solent turned her gaze to the model of the fortress. Updated constantly, it showed many, blaring warnings and issues. Dozens of high-grade alerts, reports flooding in every second. There was no way she could possibly resolve all of these matters in the short term. If the number came back from the storage sufficiently high, then nothing else would matter. All they needed was for the wave to recede. Word has been sent to the platforms, they are preparing the withdrawal formation. Tell them to abandon the defensive tools and apparatus, she instructed them. Don't waste time trying to bring them in. I want our people inside the walls and safe. AO Epsilon S. Yes, General, there was no need to risk them any further. They were heroes, each and every one. Arrest was the least that they deserved. All she needed was the number. If it was high enough, she had won. If it wasn't, then she would have to try again another time. There was no backup if the fortress failed. After everything they'd done to keep the energy flowing, it had to be enough. Surely, the headquarters was eerily still. Messengers arrived with urgent word, but none of it would matter if the order to retreat was given. The intakes are shut off. Someone announced. Let the construction teams know, Solent said calmly. They'll be able to move with more confidence knowing the flow is greatly reduced. They wouldn't have to fear every second channel would burst beneath their legs, more to the point. And then, they waited. It was Leonidant who rushed into the chamber, not even hesitating to climb over the gathered generals, scouts, mages and others waiting to see what would happen next. She ran directly up to the general and whispered something for her antennae only. Solent clacked her mandibles thoughtfully. Give the order for the battalions to retreat from the platforms. Full retreat. Everyone inside the gates and prepare for the defense. Send word to the mages, we will need to regulate the flow of cleansed mana, we don't need to cover the platforms anymore. She gave out a string of orders, and hundreds of ants sprang to life. All of a sudden, there were 1,000 things that needed to be done instantly, and they all rushed to do them. It wouldn't be long until the fortress was fully sealed, the gates would slam shut and the craft would begin their final assault, trying to break through the walls. It would be a torrid defense, but Solent was sure that the colony would hold. In the eye of the storm, Solent stood, an island of calm in a frenzy of motion. Leonidant leaned close to her sister. "Is it enough?" she asked. "Did we win? If it is or it isn't, we still have to shut the fortress," Solent replied. "We've done everything we can. But is it enough?" the scout insisted. Solent dipped her head and cleaned her antennae, thoughtfully. "Leonidant, you should know by now, I always win. As long as the eldest survived, the colony would do what had never been done before, a full and total victory over the fifth. Don't let me down, senior." Chapter 1502, The Slug Scenario. It was galling to Zaluth to find just how extensive the hidden path network of the Gluzgith tribe proved to be. All these hidden tunnels and connections which drove straight through the heart of the dungeon. Revealing its existence to them was a great show of faith on behalf of the Crathlaith, Thulzis, but also a demonstration of power. He was letting them know that his mighty tribe had access to their territory whenever they'd wanted it, a chilling thought for the Lurs, Bulg and Thus. As for the Slee, it didn't matter to Zaluth if a slug like Thulzis could access their territory, the Gluzgith could annihilate such a small tribe without even lifting a finger. What did he care? What he found so annoying was just how cunningly and expertly concealed the network was. He'd passed multiple entrances during recent months and hadn't noticed a thing. For someone who prided himself on his ability to observe and scout within the fifth stratum, it was absolutely galling that something this size had been able to slip by him. Despite the sly and ingenious tunnel network, some modifications had to be made on the way. The enormous size of the insect monster required them to widen many of the entrances, and even if the secret passages were safer, they weren't free of mucus or monsters, requiring the slugs to move carefully and fight their way through on occasion. Despite the challenges, the group was more than capable of dragging the captive monster all the way down, to what Zaluth viewed as the very depths of the stratum, but could be nothing of the sort. Despite the danger of the journey, which was very real, even the craft were not safe during a wave in the fifth, Zaluth still found it impossible not to watch the unfolding attitudes of the powerful Crathlaith around him. The deeper they traveled, the more vicious and gleeful Chost became. She had lost many warriors of her tribe to the ant monster, and its impending doom filled her with savage joy. She would often strike the ooze surrounding the creature, spitting and snarling. The others, including Zaluth himself, left her to vent her anger. Chost was, even in present company, a deadly and vicious fighter. There was no need to risk antagonizing her and turning themselves into the target of her ire. With them were also Ulis and Mulzos, leaders of the Bulg and Lurs tribes. The two spent a lot of time together, whispering and scheming. Zaluth had attempted to listen in on their discussions, but they were so secretive and cautious that he hadn't been able to get close enough. It was obvious they were plotting a course of action, perhaps even a temporary truce between their two rival tribes, to strengthen their positions once the invasion had been defeated. Perhaps they were even trying to collude against the Gluzgith, whose influence in these upper areas of the fifth had grown immensely. Zaluth judged it unlikely, however. What reason would Thulzis have to fight over these territories, even if he easily could? No doubt he was worried about other powerful tribes in the depths. There was no such thing as a tribe of Krath that didn't have rivals and enemies. The slug tribes fought and schemed amongst each other as naturally as they breathed. Zaluth turned his gaze back to the giant ant, completely entrapped with ooze. Such a powerful monster brought down by the toxins, it was almost strange to be this close to it, after what he had seen it do. The other Crathlaith acted as if the invasion was already over, now that the ants had lost their best soldier. Yet the mission remained the same. The invasion needed to be completely crushed in order to send a message to those responsible in the higher layers of the dungeon. The singing had to be extinguished, the creatures responsible subjected to the greatest horrors the slugs were capable of. And of course, the second monster they had been ordered to turn. Theorazin had spoken and Zaluth intended to see all of the tasks fulfilled. As he was ruminating over this, he felt something reverberate through the stone beneath his foot. Then again, the heart, they were getting close. Again he turned his eyes towards the ant monster. It wouldn't be long now until it was turned. Once they had submerged it in the viscous slime of the ancient, what would it look like when it emerged? He couldn't deny he felt a little of Chot's glee at the prospect. He wanted to be there when they sent it back against the ants. Hopefully the fortress hadn't been broken before then, so he could see the hideous monsters torn apart by the one they had counted on to protect them. It would be glorious. Thulsis slid back towards them and all eyes turned toward him. Not far now until we enter the heart. We will wait here until more members of my tribe arrive to bind your eyes and bring you inside. I won't allow any of you to see the hidden ways inside the slime ground. Many of the Crathlathe bristled at this. They weren't used to this treatment, but Zaluth had expected nothing less. Thulsis had no care if they liked him or not, they didn't matter in his eyes. The security of the slime ground came above all, especially around other Krath. Will your people be able to drag the monster with them? He asked. We won't be much help with our eyes covered. Thulsis noted him with a slight nod, which was more than any of the others got. I have sent for my warriors to drag the creature. Make sure none of you perform any unexpected movements. It's dangerous to move blindfolded during a wave. Very dangerous. An evil grin spread across the Crathlathe's face and Zaluth wondered which of them wouldn't arrive within the heart alive. Chapter 1503. Within the heart. Finally noticed I've been using the wrong names and tribe names for several of the Krath from the deeper locations. Shoutouts to Big G for persistently letting me know. I've been saying Gluzgith for the tribe who live in the heart, but it's meant to be the Zist, and their Crathlathe is Solus, who I've been calling Thulsis. I'll make the changes in past chapters, but going forward. Gluzgith tribe to Zist tribe. Thulsis big powerful Crathlathe to Solus. Thulsis is the Crathlathe of the Gluzgith tribe, but they don't live in the heart. This is a case of mistaken slug tribe. When the blindfold was removed, Zaluth was relieved to see that he was, in fact, within the heart and not in some secretive kill chamber about to be devoured by a blubbeast. Without being too obvious, he turned his stalks a little this way and that, trying to see who had not made it. What he saw caused him to become concerned once more. They were inside the slime ground of the Zist, to be sure, the great walls of the heart beating all around him. The floating structures, secured to the roof high above, in which the Krath lived were nearby, but he himself was on a platform with Chost by his side and Solus, flanked by two large, powerful warrior slugs before him. No need to worry, the massive slug burbled, I have no intention of killing you here. He grinned, revealing his needle-pointed fangs. Somewhere else, maybe. That was as much of a joke as a Krath was capable of, but neither of the two laughed. Chost bared her own fangs in a sign of vicious defiance. What is it you want, Solus? We came here to see the will of the ancient done. Not even you would interfere in that. The huge slug held up his many arms in a placating gesture. A little patience. To trap the prey, a true Krath knows they must be cunning and patient. A slug who can't master their base instincts will soon die, don't you agree? This was a lesson that Zaluth had drilled into himself relentlessly his entire life. Twice as much after he met Gashi. Striking with savagery was part of being Krath, but so was waiting for the right moment. Do you mind if I ask which prey you have in mind? He asked slyly. He didn't think Solus was talking about the ants, or the invasion at all. You may have noticed the other Crathlathe have been scheming amongst themselves, I know you have, Zaluth of the Slee. I don't care, Chost spat. If they come for the Thus, we will rip them apart and devour them whole. It's possible that you could, Solus allowed, acknowledging the fearsome strength Chost had cultivated, but there is no need to take such risks. With my support, two promising Crathlathe like you could expand your territories and grow strong very quickly, wouldn't you agree? Now this was interesting, exactly the kind of offer Zaluth had been looking for. All he needed was a chance for the Slee to supplant one of the larger tribes, and with the help of the mighty Zist, anything was possible. With an agreement in place with Chost as well, the Slee may well be able to take the place of a major tribe like the Bulgar Lurs. He would be remembered as a legendary Crathlathe among the Slee who had turned a weak and unknown tribe into a power in the region. And why stop there? The invasion was still ongoing, there would be many chances yet for Zaluth to win greater glory. Slugs would fear and revere him, serve under him and join their fates with his. Chost did not look convinced. She had much less to gain than he did, but Zaluth desperately needed her to agree. She was much closer than the Zist and in a better position to help him. All he needed was something she valued to gain her interest. Of the Bulg and the Lures, he began, which one has the better slime ground? I imagine the Thus could use a second home, just reward for the warriors they have sacrificed. Chost's eyes flashed red, she knew exactly what he was offering. Join with me, and we will destroy both of your rival tribes, and you can take your pick of their territories. A tempting offer indeed, and one with a great reward. Something for us to think about going forward, Solus burbled. For now, our task is not yet complete. But soon, it will be. That's when the most cunning of Crathleith will have already laid their plans. R.A. grave O grave S. Chost and Zaluth eyed each other. The large Krath spoke truly, it would be best to have made arrangements well in advance of the invasion being over. With the turning of the giant ant, that might not be far away. Let us see to the monster, Chost hissed, then I will be prepared to talk. She spat the final word as if it stung her tongue like acid, which it may as well have. She was not a feared Krathsis because of her diplomacy. Even so, Zaluth took it as a good sign. If she was willing to talk, then she was willing to be persuaded. The ascension of the Slee, and of Zaluth, was close. The others are waiting for us a little further down, Soluz said. It's a dangerous trip down to the sludge. Can't we just throw the monster in from here? Zaluth wondered. They were at the very top of the beating heart right now, with the turning pool right at the bottom. Surely they couldn't miss. This pool is a little different than the tiny little puddles you have in your slime ground, Soluz gurgled dismissively. This is the real thing, left by the ancient himself. We will treat it as such. Zaluth couldn't help but be a little intrigued. Was there really such a difference? If so, then he wanted to see it for himself. Let's get on with it, Chost spat. I didn't come all this way to delay. I want to see that ant twisted in the ancient's way. I want to see the horror that comes out of the pool with my own eyes. Soluz grinned, pleased with her vindictive savagery. We will lead the way. Thick ropes and webs of mucus connected the structures that made up the thriving and, frankly, enormous community of the Zist tribe to the walls and ceiling of the heart itself. How they managed to keep still despite the constant pulsing of the giant heart was beyond Zaluth. Some wonder of Krath magic, perhaps. Being surrounded by the rotten and slime-coated walls of the giant organ gave Zaluth a strange sense of belonging. The mana flowed so dense and thick here, his eyes stung and his mouth was seared with pain every time he opened it. The Krath who endured these conditions since hatching and survived would be strong, with powerful internal acid and endurance. No wonder the heart was such a treasured slime ground. To get to the lower reaches of the heart was not simple, as Soluz had said. They found the others waiting on a lower platform, with the ant still bound beside them. Mulzos and Ullies watched them distrustfully, but Zaluth paid them no mind. Of course everyone was scheming against each other, they were Krath. What else could be expected? From there, they needed to move the enormous monster from platform to platform, lowering it with ropes as they descended deeper and deeper. Soon, the lower chamber was in sight. 1504. The descent into the lower chamber of the heart was a difficult one. The flesh of the chamber walls was sagging and leaking mucus, yet even so, the way was narrow and dangerous. The Zist had created a path, but dragging such a large and heavy monster through wasn't easy. Once they were through, Zaluth could feel the change in the air instantly. Rising from below were such potent and toxic fumes that his skin began to bubble and burn when they brushed against him. Down there was the pool of sludge left by Theorazin, from which the pools in every other slime ground in the region had been drawn. He couldn't wait to see it up close, but was wary. Respect for the dangerous elements of the fifth was exactly what kept the Krath alive in this environment. How close are we going to get to the pool? He asked Soluz directly. The big Krath knew exactly what he was getting at. It's so potent even I will melt if I get too close, he replied. From 100 meters away, we can roll the monster in and watch the change take place. Any closer than that and I can't guarantee your safety. Even from 100 meters away. Zaluth was even more intrigued. Every Krath had a deep-seated respect for the ancient, but no idea of what Theorazin was truly capable of. To think that a pool of his perfect sludge could sit here in the heart for thousands of years and still be so potent. Chost was not feeling the same reverent emotions as Zaluth, continuing to glare at the still form of the slime-wrapped monster. She struck it once more with venom. Not long now, filth, she hissed. Soon you'll hate everything you ever loved. Still one more to go, Zaluth reminded her. The task isn't finished yet. The other one didn't kill my warriors. This one did, Chost spat, her acidic saliva bubbling on the platform. Once we have turned this one, we can return to the fortress and destroy it. With that, the singing will come to a stop and 2/3 of the ancient's task will be done, Soluz said. There may be more, Ullies, Crathleith of the Bulg, spoke up. Now that the ancient is awake, we should be prepared for more visitations. I will be prepared, but you don't need to bother, Chost bit off each word as she addressed her rival. Theorazin will only speak to the worthy. Considering he had spoken to Chost directly, it wasn't something Ullies could refute directly. Before they could retaliate, Soluz cut them off. We're here. Be silent from this point. He gave no other warning, but glared with bulging red eyes to ensure they knew he was serious. Lowered by thick strands of mucus, the platform made from hardened mold that had been melted together with acid touched down at the lower reaches of the heart. Looking up, Zaluth was still astonished at the size of the thing. A beating pump of poison and toxicity, the heart was the center of this entire section of the fifth, through which all the mana flowed, enriched by the miasma of the ancient. The walls pulsed on either side, forcing the flow of energy, a constant cycle of contamination that had made the Krath who they were. Solus noticed him looking and caught his eye with a wave of his hand. He pointed to the side and Zaluth stared. Huge pillars of ossified flesh rose up from the floor of the heart, dozens of them clustered together, the tops puckered open and sucking in vast torrents of mana. The openings of the vents. Zaluth had known of the vents his entire life, but never seen the source of their energy with his own eyes. The group continued to move down a roughly built pathway that kept them above the sticky flesh of the heart. Behind them, the monster was dragged by a group of powerful warrior slugs, hauling it towards its doom. With every moment, they drew closer, and the air of miasma grew thicker and thicker until Zaluth felt as if he could barely breathe. Looking at the others, he knew they were suffering the same, but refused to show weakness in front of their rivals. If they weren't, he certainly wouldn't, so he continued to breathe as normal, despite the searing pain. Solus wordlessly led them on until at last he came to a stop. Indicating for the others to draw closer, he pointed down at something they couldn't see. Even before laying eyes on the pool itself, Zaluth could see the vapors rising from it. They warped and twisted the air, easily visible despite having no real color. It was as if the world itself was infected by it, changing and warping by sheer proximity to something so toxic. Ra Nu Os. As he approached the edge of the path, Zaluth looked down and immediately felt a bright, burning pain in his eyes. The pool was so incredibly potent he could barely look at it. In the slime ground of the Slee, they had a pool of change, but it was diluted, with barely a mouthful of the pure sludge within it. A deep yellow streaked with virulent, bubbling green, the toxic stuff of Theorazin was so unbelievably strong he could feel his own flesh beginning to warp and sizzle just by looking at it. He lunged back, taking his eyes away and gasping for breath, even though every inhalation seared his insides. The ancient had created that. And thousands of years ago. It was impossible. Could a Krath ever hope to cultivate something that strong? Just thinking about containing it within his flesh made Zaluth quiver. He would be destroyed in an instant. When he had recovered, Zaluth turned to see he wasn't the only one to have a strong reaction to the pool. The other Krathlathe were all slumped over, gasping, all except for Solus. The large Krath was in great pain, but he held his position, expressing his superiority by standing where they could not. He raised his hands, waving his warriors to bring the monster forward. From here, it would slide down the edge of the pit in which the pool of change was located. They would only need to tip it over the edge. In the act of making the gesture, Solus paused. A change came over the air within the heart, a ripple that seemed to pulse upward, originating from the center of the dungeon. Immediately, the mana began to thin, the concentration of energy starting to drop. The wave was over. He grunted. It had lasted longer than it should. At least now they would be able to move through the tunnels much more easily. Bringing their strength to bear against what remained of the fortress would be simple. With his gesture, the warriors pulled the ant forward, still wrapped in its cocoon of slime. Though that protection wouldn't last long. The slime might be able to resist the mana of the fifth, but it couldn't protect from what lay below. Already, it was starting to dissolve. With a final heave, the warriors tipped the monster over the edge, and Solus, joined by Chost, watched eagerly as the creature began to roll and slide down to its doom. That's when the shaking started. Chapter 1505, Eruption. The moment it began, Zaluth was on alert. His first suspicion was that Solus had set a trap, but when he turned his stalks towards the Krathlathe, he looked as mystified as the rest of them. If anything, that was worse. Zaluth was prepared for betrayal, as any sensible Krath would be, but this was something else. Are we under attack? He demanded. Impossible, Solus spat. Here in the heart, who would have the guts? Who could? It's the ants, Chost frothed. They've come to save their champion after all. The large ant was still tumbling down the slope towards the pit, and Zaluth wasn't too keen on going back to take another look. It couldn't be more than seconds away from plunging into the sludge, after which there would be no going back. The shaking grew more and more pronounced, forcing the slugs to flatten their bodies and tighten their grip on the surface they clung to. What is happening? Solus raged at his warrior escorts, but none of them had an answer for him. With a hideous tearing sound, the flesh of the heart gave way as something pierced through, rapidly widening the opening and extending into the cavity within. Zaluth was so shocked to see the heart invaded that he needed a moment to recognize just what he was seeing. "The tree," he hissed. "She wouldn't dare," Solus bellowed, but the evidence of their eyes betrayed his words. Extending into the heart right in front of them was a giant root, widening and hardening with every passing moment. The slugs seethed at this blasphemous trespass, enraged that the hated interloper had gone so far as to pierce the heart. "Kill it," Solus ordered his warriors. "Send word to the tribe above. We finally have an excuse to hunt down and annihilate this foul tree once and for all." Snarling, he began to gather his immense magic, only to hesitate as something unexpected poked its head out of a small hole that had grown in the thickening wood, covered with a bubble of blue mana. 2 antennae emerged, followed by a little ant head, causing Chost to froth with rage. A moment later, a voice rang out in their heads. "Nailed it on the first try. To be expected, I suppose. I'm brilliant." Zaluth recoiled. She was in his head. How? He hadn't felt the bridge connect. And yet it had, he could sense it now. What strange method was this? He immediately moved to sever the connection, but not before the cheerful, energetic voice spoke again. "Not a great place to stand, sluggies." Then the voice seemed to shift, as if it were speaking to someone else. "We found the spot. Let it rip." Maniacal laughter echoed in his head until Zaluth finally managed to cut it off, breaking the bridge between them. How? Why? One thing was for certain. This moment was dangerous. He didn't understand what was going on, and that meant he needed to be cautious. "We should retreat until we know what is happening," he suggested to the others, preparing to flee. "Retreat," Chost spat. "We attack. If they save the captive, then we have achieved nothing." That was a good point. Zaluth felt himself torn. His instincts screamed at him to run, to hide and wait for his chance to strike, yet the ancient demanded that he stay and fight to ensure the ant was turned. Fortunately, his decision was made for him. To his right, the great stack of vents began to violently shake. A low rumble could be heard, followed by a high-pitched whistle sound as vast amounts of air and mana began to screech out of the openings. The flow of energy had reversed. Something was coming out of the vents, not in. That was all Zaluth needed to see. Between the tree root, growing larger and thickening each second, and the strange behavior of the vents, he was unsettled enough to make his decision. He didn't announce anything, or draw attention to himself. He simply flattened himself and began to run, seeking higher ground. He wasn't the only one, nor was he the first. Krath raced back along the path, trying to reach the platforms they could use to winch themselves higher. Zaluth didn't bother with the platform. He launched himself onto the slime ropes themselves, gripping tight with his foot as he began to squirm his way higher. Chost and Solus looked to hold their ground for a moment, but when the rest of the Krath ran, they saw the writing on the wall and joined them. That slight delay would prove to be fatal. With a final eruption of mana and sour air, the tops of the vents exploded as a geyser of pure blue liquid burst out of the top. With so much pressure behind it, the fluid blasted 100 meters into the air before it began to rain down. "Ron-os." Zaluth cursed and picked up his speed, rushing to get higher. He recognized the stench of that liquid, knew it for what it was, even if he didn't know how. The ants were attempting to corrupt the heart. That was tainted, concentrated mana that they had violated. They were pumping it straight back to the source. Looking down, he could see the sludge pool, sizzling and frothing with great bubbles wherever even the slightest drop of the crystal blue liquid touched it. A horrified realization came to him. They weren't trying to cleanse the heart, they were trying to cleanse the entire stratum. The heart would pump the foul energy they had created throughout this entire section of the dungeon. And if the sludge were overcome, the source of the energy within the entire fifth stratum could be at risk. Horrified, Zaluth redoubled his efforts. He needed to alert the Krath above. Chost was right, they had to fight. He twisted a stalk back down towards the deadly Krathlathe. As always, she was faster and more powerful than the others, racing to make up for the ground she had lost. He knew she would be safe, she only needed a few more moments. That's when a single drop of the purified energy landed on her back. Chost collapsed in an instant, writhing as the energy ate into the corruption in her flesh. Zaluth grit his fangs, but there was nothing he could do. He wasn't going back down there, not now. It was with a little comfort that he saw the bundle of ooze that was the giant ant splash into the sludge pool and sink beneath the surface. Too late, he thought savagely. Your moment of victory is about to turn into one of crushing despair.